Okay, so today's video will be featuring the U4. No, I'm kidding, it's not the U4. It is the Phoenix switches from Gazzew, or as you may know him on Reddit, HB Heroin Bob, or simply Paul. But you already knew that, right? Because you watched my video on the U4s. And if you haven't, here it is. Okay, you probably have heard of the Phoenix switch from Teha Types video or stream, because he did do one particular build with it. I think it was an M65. And he described it as sort of a dirty click in a good way, when you don't want something as crisp as a click bar, but you don't want something as mushy and rattly as a Sherry MX Blue. You would go for the Phoenix switches, and I think that's a correct description. However, I'd go as far as to say it is a completely new click experience altogether, because it's not as crisp, obviously, and not as mushy, but I don't think it's necessarily like in the most like in the middle way as you would describe it, but I still think it's a pretty good switch on its own. These switches were sent to me by Gazzew. I ordered 30 of them off of him, and he pre-built them for me because apparently these switches are a little bit of a bitch to make because you kind of have to push the stem inward a little bit so that it's past the click kind of, and then you got to shove the housing on fast enough so that the doesn't get stuck. The stem will either stay down or stay up if you don't do it correctly. So I do thank him for giving me these switches that have already been pre-built. The lube job in them is probably not what I want, but considering they're already lube regardless, I think it's already pretty good in my opinion. Most likely what's happening, how you lube the switches is basically like a Cherry MX Blue. You don't lube the rails, don't lube the stem, lube just the spring. And when it comes to HB Heroin Bob and his lubing technique, the lube is always going to be a little donut hole on the bottom. I don't know if this will focus, but if you take a look in there, you can probably take a look at that little bit of white on the bottom of that spring, and that is a donut hole lubing job, where he dips the spring into the lube of choice and effectively creates a donut hole. So, the Phoenix switch comes from the fact that we wanted to bring back Aristotle switches. And if you don't remember what Aristotle switches are the original like thing in which that people were using to Frankenstein. I think it was one of the most widely covered Franken switches out there. It was the Aristotle plus Zealios switches, and they came together to form the Zealiostotles. Keycaps made a video on it in which that he found and was lent a poker keyboard with SA keycaps, and I thought they sounded great. And I originally wanted that as my clicky keyboard until pale blues and whites came out for box switches, and regardless, I still had them on my mind. I find it really fascinating how we somehow managed to have this today, where we have a literal revival of the Aristotle switches, except that you don't need to put them in a Zeal housing anymore. These are actually Outemu parts, and of course, don't be turned off by the fact they're Outemu, because again, just because you have tried Outemu Blue once or twice in a $30 mechanical keyboard does not mean that all of Outemu is bad. If you think that your experience comes from only trying budget boards with Outemu switches in them and then completely disregarding it because it was your first or second mech and you're quote-unquote have upgraded from then you should probably throw that mindset out the window, because that is not only disrespectful to Gazzew and or Outemu, but it also limits your own knowledge and what switches you may or may not like. So keep that in mind while going into this video. So we have a revival of the Aristotle switch, except it's gone through, this is essentially called version 4, because V1, 2, and 3, I think V1 and V2, I forgot about what was in version 2, but version 1 of the prototype Aristotle switches, or the Phoenix switches rather, had the little teeth sticking out, which were part of the signature stem in the Aristotle switch. However, Gazzew managed to redesign the switch so it no longer needs that and still produces this hefty crunch of a click. Okay, just part of my intrusion because it appears that I may have missed something, as I was informed to include a little bit more information about the Phoenix switches, and more importantly, how do they differ from the original Aristotles? The Aristotles would have a little bit of teeth on the stem that would eventually damage the leaf, which was never good. I think that's what may have made Zealiostotles, even though they were popular, a little bit less durable, I guess, if you want to call it that. Another part of in which that the Phoenix switches distinguish themselves from the Aristotles is that originally Aristotles had a pretty bad keycap compatibility. Their cross-post dimensions weren't necessarily the best. So if you remember from my old Everglide video, that the original batches, I think the initial V1 batches, I remember Walker's Keyboard Science, he just swiped his hand across the keyboard and kind of just blasted the keycaps off. I think that is what was also prone to happen with Aristotle switches back in the day as well. And third, there was also an issue with rails along with the dimensions of said rails, because apparently there was a really bad like stem wobble that would end up really just affecting the key feel in general and sort of ruin the feel of the switch, unless if you Frankensteined it like you would with Cherry, Gateron, or Zealios switch housing. So yeah. So what's the difference then? What difference lies in the switches? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I finally got my Rack Lem Eng back from my friend that was borrowing it for quite a long while. Nothing wrong about that. If you're watching this, Jeff, I apologize for mentioning you in this video, but know that I have no hard feelings, because technically I didn't really find a problem with it either. Anyway, so on the bottom here, we have Cherry MX Blues that I got out of my Drabo Excalibur. Up here, we have the Phoenix switches, and up here are some Kale Speed Bronze switches, because I figured they would be a little bit more appropriate when comparing, because box switches have sort of a different sound profile overall due to the housing. So I figured I'd go with traditional Cherry MX stems and traditional Cherry MX style housings to get the most similar sort of experience when it comes to this. So let's try these switches loose. So I'll just click these in order. And last, this is a Clickbar mechanism. So this is a Kale Speed Bronze. Okay, so let's put some keycaps on these and see what they sound like. All right, cool. So I'll put some keycaps on these. These are all row 1, and over here are the Cherry MX Blues. Over here on the blue is the Outemu Phoenix, and of course on top is the Kale Speed Bronze. So let's try these with keycaps and see how they sound like. Kale Speed Bronze. And of course, Outemu Phoenix. And let's do this quickly one more time. Okay, clearly there's a pretty big difference in terms of both pitch, tone, and feel when it comes to the Outemu Phoenix switches. And honestly, I feel like they're pretty fucking good. I'm spoiled by Clickbars because I personally think they are pretty good, and I honestly feel like they're pretty worth the money because they're $3 ish around that mark for pretty much any of them except for the box crystals and royals and all that. But in terms of strictly clicking, it's like $3 to $3.40. So I'm pretty spoiled by them. However, they obviously aren't as deep and or loud as Phoenix switches because Phoenix switches, oh my god, they are loud as fuck, man. So if you want to take this into your office place just to piss people off, don't even bother with Cherry MX Blues. Go with Phoenix switches because holy shit. So each switch costs you around 55 to 65 cents, just like all his other switches, but this time you probably need to buy the entire set. But regardless, I am in love with these switches, and I hope you are too, especially if you do like clicky switches. I feel like you are obligated to try these if you only have experiences with Cherry MX Blue so far. So, hey. Another thing I wanted to mention before the video ends is that there is a small bit of history that is going to be made to the current Phoenix Switch lineup. Keep in mind the Phoenix Switch is the Phoenix Switch due to the stem. The magic is all in the stem, just like how the U4s and Silent Tactiles are. It's all in the stem. And when it comes to the Phoenix Switches, because there are currently two versions of it. One is that you buy the parts from Gazzew, and he gives you the parts so you can assemble it yourself. And there is also a factory assembled version. Now, there is a bit of a difference between the two. One, because you have the control to lube everything yourself along with assembling it yourself. When you buy it from Gazzew, you have full control of what your switch sounds like. However, if you don't have the time, nor if you have the ability to create your own assemble switches, there is a factory assembled version as well. However, they don't lube the springs, so be aware if you buy those and there's a bit of spring ping going on. I understand it doesn't really matter that much because it's a pretty loud and clicky switch, but lubing the springs on any clicky switch, if not any switch in general, should be common practice because it eliminates a really bad key feel and some inconsistencies to make a pretty good switch out of pretty much any switch you get. That being said, if you really want lubed Phoenix switches and you don't have any lube, Gazzew does offer switch lubing services, and I think he does charge a little bit per switch. I've forgotten off the top of my head, but a quick search on his Reddit profile around the current time of this video should suffice for you to find how much it costs for you to get a switch lubed and see if it's worth it.